Now, tributes are flowing tonight for beloved TV and fashion icon Maggie Taburin, who has died aged 87. Maggie wore many hats, both figuratively and literally, from designer to fashion editor to on-air personality. She's also remembered as Australia's first supermodel.
Maggie Taburin was just 23 when she was discovered by a photographer in Melbourne, the beginning of her 7 decades-long career.
Everyone knew the name Maggie Taburin. She just parlayed that effortlessly into all these other areas.
Her love for fashion soon turned into a column for the Daily Mirror. She then took on the TV world as a panellist for Beauty and the Beast.
It dealt with human problems, and there'll always be problems as long as they're humans.
Maggie cemented herself as a staple of Aussie screens, hosting her own daily chat show, Maggie, and going on to win back-to-back gold Logies in the early 70s.
She had such a big impact, not just on Australian fashion, but also on how Australians see themselves and how the world sees Australian women.
She also served as fashion editor of Women's Weekly for 15 years, returning to grace the cover as recently as 2021 at the age of 84.
So do you know that most people sadly spend the last 20 years of their life being miserable? That's right. Not me.
Today, glowing tributes flowed from friends and colleagues.
No words right now, just tears.
Maggie defined Australian style with her elegance, sophistication and grace.
Legend, icon, champion.
The loss of a pure class act.
Maggie died just 5 days before her 88th birthday. She's survived by her 2 daughters, Amanda and Brooke.
Deb Thomas is the former editor of the Australian Women's Weekly. She worked closely with Maggie over the years, became good friends with her. Deb, it's a really sad day. Thanks so much for coming on. But as we saw there, what a life.
What a life. It is a very sad day. She'll be sorely missed by many, many people who knew her personally and those who just knew the extraordinary things that she did in terms of her TV shows and pages in the magazines and newspapers, as you mentioned. She lived about 4 lives in one, and as you said, why spend the last years of your life hiding away? Maggie did it right up until the end.
What are your best memories of her?
Oh, I'll go right back to when I first met her. I was actually modelling, and Maggie was very well-known and probably the #1 producer of fashion shows, and I was terribly frightened by her, to be honest, but she was so warm and so charismatic, she made you feel very relaxed. But what I really remember was going to a restaurant one night with her, with some friends, young designers that she was championing, Mark and Jeffrey. And at the end of the meal, Maggie pulled out her compact and put her lipstick on. And I was like, oh, my goodness, if Maggie Taburin can do that at the table, I can do that too. And I've probably been doing it ever since. So lots of fond memories of her. Probably another one I remember was when she was photographing our house for one of her shows, and she was holding my son, who was about 6 months old, and he vomited all over her shoulder during the shoot, and she was completely unfazed. She just held him and kept on going. She didn't mind at all. She was very real and very warm.
Deb, my favourite memory of Maggie was when I happened to sit on the table next to hers at the Logies last year. She was an absolute whirlwind. She must have been 86 at the time, but she wasn't happy with how far back we were in the room, and I think that's fair enough. So she was always full of energy, wasn't she?
She wasn't. She always called it out, Dave. She always said, even in her pages in the Women's Weekly, she would call out people for bad fashion. She just, she was kind of what you see is what you get. But she always had a sense of humour about it and very self-deprecating. And whenever she walked into the room, and I'm sure even at the Logies, every head turned because Maggie was the stylish and most beautiful woman in the room and just oozed charisma. So lots of fun to be with and a very funny person.
On that style, what do you think will be Maggie's lasting contribution to our fashion and media industry?
The fact that she championed Australian fashion and put it on the map as much as she did, but importantly, she also she made sure that women knew that they could be stylish at any age and any shape. The whole thing about plus-size fashion started with Maggie. You didn't have to be model thin to look good, and she even put out the Maggie T fashion range. And I think letting women be themselves at any age and at any sort of shape is really something that Maggie championed, and we all stood behind her for that.
Oh, what a beautiful person. Deb, thank you so much for sharing your memories of her with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's lovely to celebrate her.
Yeah, amazing legacy.